Of the international meeting for African CEOs and investors will be taking place in March 2019. The Africa CEO Forum has become a leading gathering of Africa's private sector leadership. It hosts the continent's top CEOs and international investors, experts and high-level policymakers. South African multinationals need to be more bullish when it comes to investing on the rest of the continent. Kuseni Dlamini, who is the chairperson of Massmart, will join other participants from across the continent to discuss how they can unlock the opportunities for the development of the continent. He spoke to Collen Lemawane about the importance of the forum.
They're hugely beneficial because South African companies really have to be awake on the opportunities that are out there on the continent. You've got companies from Asia, from Latin America, Europe, and North America crisscrossing the continent, taking positions. On our backyard, we will wake up and find that it's dominated by Chinese, Indian companies or Russian companies. I think intra-regional trade is so important in Africa. In March this year in Rwanda, Kigali, the African Union signed the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is encouraging trade and investment and the free movement of people across the African continent. If we look at Africa from a global context, we're the only continent that trades the least with itself and trades the most with outside continents. Intra-Africa trade stands at 12%. If you look at continents such as Europe and Asia, it's north of 50%. So there's massive opportunity for South African companies to invest within Africa, and dare I say African companies also to invest in South Africa so that we increase intra-regional trade and investment flows.
In formulating all these trade partnerships and deals, what is of prime importance when you have to consider these deals on paper, given the risk factors on the African continent?
So commercial sustainability really tops the agenda, and the investment rate of return is top on the agenda, and the imperative to contribute to development that is inclusive on the continent, that creates jobs for Africans, and the empowerment of local people, whether they are suppliers, they are employees. Within Massmart, for example, 95% of our staff in most African countries are locals. We take time and spend resources in training them when we prepare to open new stores. When we look at the fresh food that we sell across Africa, by far the majority is sourced from local farmers. We look for partners that can supply us on the range of goods that we sell in our stores across the continent.
What about local beneficiation in terms of the product offering that is in place? When you consider the supply side of things like manufacturing and importing raw materials, so that the initial product that is sold in the market is from the hands that are from the locals.
That's a very important point. Here in South Africa, we set up a supplier development program about 5-6 years ago, and out of that we've managed to assist 33 companies. It's largely run by Black South Africans, young, and I'm pleased to say, and also female to some extent, and I'm very pleased to say they help supply our stores in South Africa. You can find their goods in macro stores, in Game, and in Builders Warehouse. But secondly, and most importantly, they've also assisted us in some instances to substitute imports, to really push back against imports coming into the country, and by so doing, localize the jobs here in South Africa. I mean, in addition to that, as Massmart, we are going further to say, how can we partner with these suppliers so that we can assist them to access the global supply chain of Walmart? We are part of the Walmart group, and Walmart is in 28 countries around the world. Some of these homegrown entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs, young and female, from South Africa, have managed to produce goods that are of a global quality standard and are exporting out of South Africa. So there is a lot of importance that we attach to local sourcing, to partnering with local suppliers in the markets where we operate. We believe that makes economic sense, because if they supply us, they employ people, and the more people they employ, the more people have disposable income and can be able to afford to buy from our stores. But it's not a charity.
But look at the irony now. I mean, like, if you're talking about employment, here in South Africa, we're talking about retrenchments. And the R word is becoming entrenched in the public sector as well as the private sector. So how do you look at participating in an investment forum, whereas at home, you know that the country is in dire financial constraints, the economy is at low levels. For a very long time, it looks like this is going to be a tall order, because if people are going to join the unemployment line and the economy is affected like this, how are you going to get an uptick in the products that you are selling in the market now?
Yeah, unemployment is not good for retailers, so we don't like to hear the R word. The retrenchments that you are hearing about in the public sector, and some sections of the mining industry have also announced retrenchments. I think this must be a wake-up call to all leaders in government and in the business sector to really think long and hard before they resort to retrenchments. We have an unemployment rate of 27.5% in terms of the restricted definition of unemployment. If you use the expanded definition of unemployment, which includes discouraged work seekers, the unemployment rate is well over 37%. That's not sustainable. If we want to reduce poverty, more people must be employed. If we want to reduce the inequalities that we complain about and our politicians complain about, we need to create jobs. And to see the government announcing retrenchments is not encouraging. And indeed, to see any business announcing retrenchments is not encouraging. What we need to focus on is how do we grow our economy in a way that allows us to create jobs and also to retain the jobs that exist and create the jobs that don't exist, so that the young people in our townships and in our rural areas that are unemployed can be absorbed into the labor market and can become meaningful and substantive economic citizens. So we have just had, Colin, the job summit, which was encouraging. We're all talking about how do you create jobs and how do we avoid the loss of jobs. But now the retrenchment word is becoming more common, and that's really unfortunate, and that is something that we should be ashamed of.
Well, looking forward to the summit that's going to take place in Kigali, given the previous ones, what has been your impression of the investment appetite of the other CEOs who are taking part in such forums? Yeah,
I spoke at the one in Abidjan in March this year, which was actually well attended by lots of CEOs, lots of companies, and it was really fantastic to see the palpable sense of excitement and interest from African investors and offshore investors in opportunities on the African continent. The one in Kigali that's taking place early next year is going to have 70 countries participating. 1,500 delegates are expected to participate. About 700 CEOs are expected. And I think that's really going to be a clearinghouse of really cutting-edge, relevant, and up-to-date ideas in terms of the opportunities that are there for investors on the continent. And we really need to mobilize global investor interest on the African continent. We have a very great potential as a continent to be the next terrain of opportunity from a growth perspective. Probably where China was 15 to 20 years ago. I mean, the IMF is projecting 4% growth in Africa in 2019. If we look at East Africa, where the conference will be, East African countries are projected to grow at 5.9%, which is close to 6%. That's really, really encouraging. Indeed, countries such as Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Kenya, they're projected to grow at over 5%. And this growth comes with the growth of a middle class, growth of a consumer class, and the creation of massive opportunities across the economy, comes with industrialization and urbanization, which is a stimulus to the rest of the economy. So it's really important for African business leaders, government leaders, investors, and funders to get the opportunity in the Africa CEO Forum that will be in Kigali, to really engage in terms of how do we really accelerate the growth and development of Africa. And I think this forum is important in that regard.
So on a parting shot, do you think that any CEO out of the 1,500 should be worried about political instability and markets that are hard to penetrate on the African continent? If you have economic issues in Zimbabwe, having inflation skyrocketing, and you have problems with the elections in the DRC, and in Sudan, we have the South-North Sudan conflict that is really hampering progress in as far as development is concerned. Do you think that it would be feasible to look at such markets?
That's a very good point, Colin. The good news is that those cases that you've highlighted, they are becoming the exception rather than the norm. The new normal in Africa is that you've got democratic elections, peaceful transitions from one administration to another. You're having rule of law. You're having African leaders increasingly wanting to engage with the private sector. You're having investment in infrastructure. I always marvel when I travel around the continent. Each time I go back to a country, I find that it's better than the last time I was there, which is encouraging. South Sudan should come right. Zimbabwe is having problems now, but President Mnangagwa is saying all the right things about Zimbabwe being ready for business. He needs the support of SADC. In Angola, President João Lourenço is doing all the right things. He's lifted visa requirements. It used to be very difficult to go to Angola. And Ethiopia is really growing and has positioned itself as a magnet for the attraction and retention of global investors in their manufacturing sector. They're reforming their state-owned companies, privatizing some of them, selling some of them, partially privatizing others. So there's a lot we can learn from what Ethiopia is doing.